absolutely fantastic. I think we'll kick off. I know myself and Tony are really excited by this session. We've had the benefit of reading a book, Human-Sided Digital Business Transformation, which really is behind the topic for this event. But even better, we've the author of that book with us today, Kamales Lardi, an absolutely fantastic book. I know it's still pre-release, but myself and Tony had the benefit of reading it over the last week or so. This is part of the Digital Transformation Leaders Series from the Digital Transformation Lab in Cork University Business School. And what I would really like to do is hand over to Kamales, just so Kamales can introduce herself to us and to who maybe some of us aren't aware of who Kamales is. Kamales, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, Paddy and Tony. Thank you guys for having me here today. It's really a pleasure to join you. I followed your series for the last, I can't even remember how many years, and I think it's really exciting to be part of this discussion today. A quick introduction about myself. I am from Malaysia originally, and I've worked across various regions. I've spent most of my time over the last 2 decades here in Europe, specifically in Switzerland. And my background really is, over almost 23 years of work in digital business transformation. So I've worked with companies of all sizes across multiple industries, across multiple regions, supporting various organizations in executing their digital transformation strategies. And one of the things that really excites me about this topic, a lot of times we tend to think about digital transformation as a topic that's existed over the past couple of years. It's gained a lot of hype over the last decade or so, simply because of the disruptive nature of technology, the accelerated technology development. But it is a topic that's been around for a long time. I personally have worked in digital transformation over the last 2 decades. And as far as we can remember technology having an impact in business, we've had the need for digital transformation in business. So this is a long-standing space. And I'm also quite active in teaching. I've taught in different universities. I'm a teaching fellow at Durham Business School in the UK as well, where I studied, where I did my MBA. I'm also, my background mainly is in management consulting. So I've had experiences in companies like Accenture. I was the head of Deloitte Digital in Switzerland until 2011, and started my own consulting firm, which I was running for the last 10 years, and recently joined as managing director of Valtech in Switzerland. And we are basically a digital transformation partner organization. So it's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm really excited that my book is out. I just got a physical copy literally an hour ago, so it's very exciting.
I'll hold it up there. Hold it up.
I don't know if you can see it actually.
Ah, brilliant, brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, firstly, Kamales, delighted that you're here. I know we've been in touch over the years, and I'm a big fan of the work you do. But congratulations on the book. Fantastic read. I agree with Paddy. Look, I've read it and really enjoyed it. And I suppose, look, the topic itself is one of those topics that we don't spend enough time on, the human side of digital transformation. So why don't we get straight into it? What was the motivation for you in terms of writing the book?
It's something that stood out for me over the years. Having worked in this space for such a long time, the focus for many companies has always been around technology implementation, channel access, product and services. But there's been a significant shift in the business landscape from product-based offerings towards more experience-based offerings, and companies starting to realize that these experiences not just translate in terms of customer touch points and so on, but really understanding people and understanding how people use technology. And this also started to translate towards the internal organizational environments, right? The people in your organization, how they use technology and how you create products and services, how these people internally create solutions for the external market. And so all of these elements stood out for me because one thing that I've noticed beyond, a doubt, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, it doesn't matter which region you're in, what culture you are in, the people make or break any transformation effort. And whether it's a strategic effort, whether it's something that's, you spend hundreds of millions on, or if it's a small budget piece, people make or break the success of these initiatives. And this is what drove me to actually write the book. It's this 2 decades of experience sitting down across the table from other people, realizing that those are the people that are going to make what I'm trying to do in an organization successful or not. And I have to say, though, this has been a journey and a learning for me as well. If I had thought about this maybe 10, 20 years ago, I may have had a very different opinion about what creates success in a transformation initiative. Today, the learnings that I've built over the years, I think sitting down and understanding the human side of things, understanding people's motivation, understanding why someone does something or why someone would hesitate to use a solution. You know, all of these different motivational elements really drove me to understand that I need to first engage with people before I can ensure a success of a project.
Yeah, now one quote you had in the book was from Didier Bonnet, and you said, you know, people are 80% focused on digital and only 20% on transformation. And you mentioned the span of time there. Has that actually improved in the 20 years or so you've been looking at this?
I think, you know, what I have, okay, first of all, I don't believe it's improved that much. There hasn't been that significant shift away from, you know, the focus has always been around the technology that we're implementing or the channels that we want to use and how we're going to put our products and services out there in the market. So that does, to a certain extent, still take priority in many organizations, but COVID has actually shifted this mindset a little bit because we had to start thinking in a different way. Suddenly, the things that we thought could never be taken away from us were gone, right? Our access points, our physical touch points, our engagement points. And it left us as a global community a little bit lost, you know, how do we continue now? And I think this shone a little bit of a spotlight on the fact that people are vulnerable. There's nothing that's certain. There's a certain level of uncertainty we live within. And leadership teams started to recognize that, you know, we need to now start focusing on the people interaction, the human side of things. And so I believe that mindset is shifting. I'm seeing a lot more organizations trying to focus on, you know, touch points and emotional touch points with customers. I've seen more policies shifting within organizations where they start looking at allowing more vulnerability with their employee base, accepting those vulnerabilities. And we see a lot of that as well now with mental health awareness days and things like that, where things that used to be very taboo, human things, natural human things, are becoming more and more accepted. We can talk more about it. And I think the shift is happening, so I'm quite glad to see that, to be honest.
Interesting. Yeah, and it's a very interesting point. We would be fairly active sort of in the human-centered design part of it, Kamales, you know, and maybe one comment about COVID, and actually the book is so up to date, you know, it is talking about a COVID, a post-COVID world, you know, but maybe one point that there was such a rush maybe during COVID to get services online, to keep people safe, that sometimes, you know, it was more about, I suppose, keeping turnover up, etc. And maybe the human bit was a bit squeezed out of it. We're in such a rush that maybe we didn't design with the human at the center of things.
I think you're hitting the nail on the head with that, Paddy, because one of the things we noticed during that COVID time is, yes, of course, there was a significant rush and surprising rush, right? You guys would probably agree with me. The surprising number of companies that did not already have these digital access points, right? And these were some of the key elements that supported my business at the time as well, where I needed to help companies very quickly get online, very quickly create these digital access points and acquisition points. But what happened was, at the very beginning of the COVID crisis, companies were rushing to get into these digital spaces, right? But they very quickly realized just having the presence in those spaces was not enough. We needed to engage with people. We need to make them solutions that were convenient for them as well. And so this shift happened as well very quickly, where people started to realize that, or leadership structures in organizations started to realize we need not only to engage on those touch points, we needed our internal people to be enabled as well. I can give you a quick example of this. One of the companies that I had worked with very early on, was working with data. So data privacy was a big topic in their industry, and they needed to provide access to their employees who were on lockdown. So one of the things they did was they created CD drives. So they burned CDs to send out to employees with data of customers on it. And very quickly started to realize that most laptops people have today don't have a CD drive anymore. Yeah. And so that was that was a revelation for them, because they thought, okay, this is the most secure way for us to hand out this, and they had it in registered post and everything, sent it out, and then the employees called them up and said, oh, by the way, we don't actually have CD drives, we have to buy them on Amazon. So that was, kind of not thinking about the human side of things, right? So we need to share our information, but how do people actually use that information on their end? So this is just a very simple example of this shift that needs to happen. We need to start thinking about not just what we offer to people, but how they eventually will use technology as well.
Yeah, and in the book, you talk about, shock. And, I suppose COVID is a bit of a shock. You talk about shift, and you also talk about evolution. So do you see, is like evolution more considered in terms of how we look at the human side? Or is it, when actually it's the same across the board?
I think, surprisingly enough, people fall into this kind of, and I think probably this is very human as a behavior pattern, right? We fall into these habits, and we become very much accustomed to our environment and ways of doing things. And once we become comfortable in our environment, it's very difficult for us to change. And this is why, when we talk about what triggers transformation within an organization or for an organization, it tends to be the shock factor, right? The one trigger that typically does tend to come across is an external factor, a change in your customer base, or digital disruption. So one of these elements really shocking us into a situation where we think, okay, now we've got to change. We've got to do something different. And what we would like to see is more of a shift, or more of a planned evolution, where companies are starting to think beyond where they are today. And we saw a lot of shifts as well during the COVID environment. We saw companies doing this pivot, companies that were very focused on their physical touch points and environments, or were offering products and services that were physical based, having to shift and pivot into kind of more digital offerings, right? This was kind of a gradual on the need basis that happened. What I'd like to see is more organizations and leadership teams doing this evolution process, thinking about where they want to be in the next 5 to 10 years, and not even 10 years, because we're talking about a much shorter time frame with the changes that are happening today. Where do we want to see ourselves in the next 5 years? Do our business models, or are our business models fit enough for that journey? Will the business model that we have today survive in the next 5 years? And how is this business model going to change? How is our external environment going to change? And almost make a planned shift towards that stage. And a lot of the work that we do today is around target operating model design for the digital space, really looking at how your organization can make this planned evolution into this new digital ecosystem that we're looking at as the future business space.
I think it's a really nice model, though, shock, shift, evolution, and actually they bring their own demands, but also I suppose the way we respond to them can be quite different. And I was intrigued by it's in the book, Kamales, that you said that sometimes change management falls short of what's required for digital transformation. And I was intrigued by that because you're clearly drawing a differentiating line between change management and transformation. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Definitely. This is something that I found very fascinating as well. And something I wanted to do in this book was not just look at the typical content around digital transformation. I wanted to look beyond that. And you will see, I think you noticed this as well, Paddy and Tony, a lot of the content goes into human transformation discussions as well. And one of the key things I wanted to have was around consciousness. So conscious leadership, conscious business management, conscious development of a purpose for an organization. And so a key thing that I tried to address in the book is looking at what is shifting in your organization, and how can you shift according to that, or how can you move your organization along this journey as well. So I do address the topic of culture management and change management very deeply, in terms of when we look at a transformation project, if we look at transformation as a project, we tend to say, let's do change management. Let's communicate the change. Let's take people on this, communication journey where we show them where we want to get to and so on. Typical approach that an organization would take. Hasn't really worked. And what we do tend to see, and you guys will probably agree, is the first thing that gets cut in terms of scope or budget tends to be the nice to have things like change management. And that's because change management doesn't communicate its true value to a transformation piece. So when we look at the organization transformation as a human transformation, we tend to look at it from a more conscious perspective, right? So what this means is change management tends to be more of a doing aspect. You want to do something. You tell people, this is what we're going to do. You provide them processes, you provide them communication tools, and you probably take them on this communication journey. But culture transformation that's really needed in a human transformation piece, this is more of a beingness, where you solidify with people in your organization and also to the external market that your purpose of the organization is shifting, that you're focusing on delivering a bigger, grander value than just products and services in the market. And this beingness, right, shifting from doingness to beingness, you want to present yourself as a more holistic organization. And this is where the transformation of a company comes from. And this involves transformation of the leadership team, transformation of mindsets, transformation of the way you do things in the organization, the types of products and services you put out in the market, as well as the contribution of the company to the world in general. This is crucial. And I think, one of the things we discussed a little bit about as well is it's crucial because we are seeing a generational shift in people, where these types of topics are becoming more and more important, right? And this is what I tried to convey in the book, that we need to move away from change management to look more at transformation management and what your organization represents in the world and how you can solidify this message.
Yeah, and you very much focused in on being clear on the why. Why the organization exists, what's the purpose? Because I think, Kamales, and I'd be interested in your views on this, I think part of the problem is organizations rush to point solutions and they haven't spent any time on the why or how they're going to get there, but they're focused on solutions. Well, what's your own thoughts on this?
I mean, it's not a new concept, right? So we've seen, I do quote Simon Sinek quite a bit in the book around creating a kind of purpose-driven organization. It's becoming more and more true today. We're seeing this generational shift of people. If I consider my daughter, who's a Gen Z/Alpha generation, the next generation of people, she's not looking to go in and work in an organization the way we in Gen X were doing, right? Many years ago, we were looking for stability. Perhaps we were looking for some work-life balance, and our generation, the generation before us, the boomers, were looking for stability and they were looking for security. We looked more for work-life balance. The millennials started to create a shift where they were looking for organizations to contribute more, to give them a higher purpose, a feeling of belonging to something bigger. The Gen Zs and the Alphas are demanding this. They're not just asking for it, they're demanding it, and they have other options to them. So if they don't work, and we see this with our kids, if they're not going to work in a 9-to-5 environment, they're going to be the next YouTube star or TikTok star, and they can generate an income already. And they are, I can give you an example of my daughter. I do describe scenarios about her quite a bit in the book. She's 11 and a half, she's not even 12 yet. She turns 12 in a couple of months. And she said, okay, this holidays, I want to go to London and I want to go on a shopping spree. And she decided that the best way to do that would be to earn her own money. And so she went into the cellar, pulled out all of her old toys, went and registered for a flea market with her dad, and then sold up to $600 worth of toys, old toys. So she had spending money. And I was completely in awe of this, because this is the next generation of people who, if they face an issue, they're going to find a way to resolve that issue. And they are sophisticated enough. They have so much more access to information, to technology. They're so much more in tune with what the world needs. And for her, it wasn't just about making the money. It was about giving a new home to these secondhand toys. And, this is circular economy and not creating waste. And this, I'm in awe of this, because our generation were not thinking that way. this is the new generation of people that organizations are going to have to hire and cater to and provide, goods and services for. This is a completely new mindset and a new way of thinking. And one of the interesting things, I recently spoke to a C-level executive from a big bank headquartered here in Switzerland. And he was saying the next generation of customers, the 20-somethings that they speak to for retail banking, they're not only asking whether the bank has a sustainable supply chain, they're also asking whether the bank's customers have a sustainable supply chain. So they're looking upstream, downstream, across the entire value chain for companies that align with their value system. And I find this so fascinating as a topic.
And Kamales, what strikes me is that, we need to look at transformation, obviously, in terms of today. But if we roll forward, these are going to be the future customers, the future employees, the future business owners. Are organizations actually even thinking about that? Because the amount of transformation they'll have to do is huge.
I'm curious to hear feedback from the audience as well as from yourselves, because my personal view is that they're not yet. Most companies are not at that maturity where they're thinking beyond today's business environment and thinking beyond the current, or the 1 year up, the next 1 year, what's going to happen in their business. Obviously, there's strategic planning that goes on, but I challenge companies and leadership teams to think 5 years down the line, to put their business models to a test to see, can we cater to this next generation of consumers? Are we going to be able to survive with our current employee base? And are we going to attract and engage the next generation of employees? Are our organizations even going to have employees? And these are topics that are quite fascinating for me. I think what we've seen during the pandemic is companies that already had very strong purpose and culture built in were the ones that survived and did very well in that pandemic environment. Companies that had, that were very focused on kind of financial returns as well as product and services and didn't have this central purpose and DNA, they struggled to maintain engagement with their employees, and there were lots of difficult situations that they had to face. So I think for the next stage of survival in the digital space, it becomes all the more important for companies to become more human. This is the kind of contradictory message that I'd like to share.
And I want to maybe throw a bit of a curveball at it, and it's sort of based on discussions. I was telling people I was coming on and what we'd be talking about, Kamales, and it was interesting. So they'd probably be people maybe a good few of them maybe my age with younger kids, and part of what we were discussing really was that organizations, and maybe he was asking the question, are organizations falling into the trap of designing a future that only assumes it's going to be for younger people, that think, work, and be, using your word, be in a certain way? And actually, are we losing sight of the fact that there's multiple generations in society, there's multiple generations in companies, and yet all the focus seems to be going on this new way of working, new way of thinking, new way of being, which really maybe suits one generation, but not all generations?
I would challenge that a little bit to say, I think most generations are shifting towards this. We're seeing the influence of the new generation on the previous generations as well. So if I just watch conversations between my daughter and my dad who's a boomer, and my daughter who's the Gen Z, the conversations that they have, the mindset shifts that happen in those conversations, the teaching that happens both ways. And we're seeing many organizations that are a little bit more on the higher maturity of the digital scale, looking at building this kind of younger advisory boards that come in for this cross-learning with senior leadership members. So this cross-generational learning, I think, is an important aspect. And the companies that are able to take advantage of that will be able to, I think, create an environment that's acceptable for most generations. But honestly, when we look at companies that are, or brands that run after sort of this metaverse space, where they're planning towards the space where people are going to be fully immersive and digital, I challenge that a little bit, because I think at the end of the day, those solutions, for me, it seems very similar to the .com era of the past, right? We saw these cycles come up again many times with different technology solutions. the thing that's going to be extremely valuable and create success for brands is going to be the value proposition. What is that human touch? What is that engagement point? What is that value that you can create through these different touch points that's going to last? And it's not just about making digital space available. And it's not just about, at the moment, there's a lot of hype in there. I agree. But the sustainable value will come from these digital touch points becoming more human or creating more human engagements. And this we haven't really seen for the masses yet.
Yeah, and a point you bring out in the book, Kamales, is around, culture and change. And, quite often we forget that we need to change how we engage, how we work, how we measure, how we do a whole range of things, because, here's transformation over here, or digital transformation, and, big fanfare, but then we go back to doing what we're doing. And I think what you're kind of talk about in the book is, but actually we need to get the culture right, and we need to be focused on the things that matter. And then we need to start doing the things that matter. And if that means that, we're bringing the ship in a certain direction, well, is that what we're focused on?
I think one of the biggest mistakes I've seen in digital transformation, because I've supported companies across many industries and regions to implement their transformation projects. And the biggest mistake is when you view transformation as a project. Right? This is kind of something that I always have to start off by describing to leadership teams. It's not a project that has a start date and an end date. It's an evolution. It's a drive that you have to take people on this journey, your customers as well as your employees. You have to take them on a journey, and it's an evolution process. And this is the biggest challenge when you look at an evolution. It involves mindset change. It involves beliefs and values and behavior change. And that comes with the cultural transformation that needs to happen. And a lot of I think there are a couple of examples that I have in the book where back in the early 2000s and even more recently, where transformation projects, technology has been implemented and companies don't see the results simply because people then create kind of a shadow organization where they go back to doing things the old way. And that's simply because there's the cultural shift has not happened. I can share an example as well with one company that I worked with over the last 3 years. And it's such an interesting example for me, because this is an organization that 3 years ago, I started engaging with them just before the pandemic hit. We started looking at digital transformation as a strategy, roadmap, initiatives. One of the first things that I had proposed to them as part of this roadmap was a culture change initiative. We need to look at where your current employees are in terms of mindset, behavior, and shift that culture towards a more digital focused culture. And identify what motivates them and what drives them, and how can we serve them better with the technologies and solutions that we're putting in place. And one of the first things we received as a response from the leadership team was, oh no, culture is not interesting for us. We don't need a HR initiative, so let's look at the technology solutions. So we parked that topic for about 1.5 years, and we said, let's focus on some of the other technology solutions, started to implement some of the changes. And sure enough, 1.5 years later, we came back to the culture piece, and the CEO said, I think we need to have this. This is so crucial, because the other initiatives are being implemented, but we see challenges in the way people discuss topics, in the lack of collaboration, in the way conflicts are resolved, in the way people accept and adopt technology. So they started to notice that there was a missing piece, and that missing piece was this culture transformation. So we initiated that piece and very quickly accelerated all of the technology and the other solutions that were being implemented. So it's such a crucial element, and it solidifies again that the human side is the core of any digital transformation piece.
Yeah, I mean, one of the examples in the book you talk about is where they took on board a new ERP system, but actually the staff didn't adopt it, or the employees didn't adopt it. So they ended up with the workarounds plus the new ERP, and the actual amount of time involved went up, not down. So it is so important, because if the organization doesn't embrace it fully, you're not really changing anything bar some of the technology.
I think that's such a crucial piece. And it's not only about people using technology and adopting technology, it's about technology advocacy. The most powerful outcome you can get from a digital transformation piece is when the employees and your customers whoever you're implementing the solutions for, adopt the technology and then advocate for it and say, you've got to try this. This is really good. That's when you know you've won with your transformation initiatives.
Yeah, and I think there's some really nice questions coming in as well, and I will work through them. And a good few of them seem to be about the line between transformation and change management. But I suppose one comment or question, Kamales, and I see it a lot in organizations. Does the organization drive people to behave according to a culture, or should they be adapting the organization to the values of their employees? And where is that line? I know, maybe a lot of us work in consultancy before. We were driving nearly culture on top of people, culture change on top of people, and that you had to align with the new culture. Whereas there's maybe a more emergent now view, whereas, hold on, we employ people of certain values and we should be adjusting the company to suit those values. Any views on that, Kamales?
So this is something that I do address a little bit in the book, the process of how you drive the culture change piece or drive the culture for transformation. And I think one of the key things is any collective group of people that you have in an organization or in any community, there will be an innate culture in that group. And part of the organization and the leadership team's role should be to identify what that culture is. And is that the culture that you want to propagate? Is that the culture that you want to represent the organization? And is that the culture that's going to help you survive and thrive in the next decade of business? And this is such a crucial element. A lot of times you see companies having these mottos or these company DNA logos and things like that they share around organizations being represented by specific words. But really understanding, is that what represents the values of the people within that community, within that group, that organization? And is that what you want the brand to represent to customers? And a lot of times companies will find that driving these values and these core behaviors within the organization is going to be so important for its success in the next.
And they're saying that culture transformation is very messy. And one of the big challenges is that senior executives have shorter tenures and they are rewarded for short-term results. So therefore, culture very often is maybe squeezed out. Very few are looking at it over the long term.
I think this is a very, very important question. So I'm glad that it's been raised. We are what we measure. I believe this very much. And I've seen this throughout my career, where organizations that, if you measure the wrong thing, you won't have the results that you're looking for, whether it is measuring leadership capabilities or outcomes from an organization or even from data analytics. So I think this is very important. What we're seeing within organizations is most of the time leadership teams are not measured on those long-term outcomes. They are measured even perhaps on a quarterly basis and short-term results that are provided. And I think this is something that has to shift. But what I'd like to really, really emphasize here, though, is culture within an organization or within any community, within any structure, it will outlive any individual person within the organization or any leadership structure within an organization. A culture is something that's embedded within the structure of the community that lives in it, the individual people and their beliefs. And this is why one of the reasons it's so important to build this up in the right way within an organization to ensure transformation success for the next stage. What I was saying before we got disconnected earlier was building up this culture means really understanding, what are the purposes and beliefs different people within the organization have and how we can propagate that. So it really does involve behaviors and values, understanding what the values are in the organization and driving behaviors that align with those values. This is what culture is all about. And this is the foundation element of digital transformation. So looking at, and one of the things I was starting to mention was around Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If we are able to identify the values that people prioritize within your organization structure, and you're able to deliver on those values, so if you're an organization that says, we think security or safety is the highest priority. So you're in a, let's say you're in a manufacturing industry and security is one of the highest values. The values should be so well embedded within the organization, and it should be demonstrated, rewarded, and managed in such a way that even the most junior person in the organization would be able to speak up to the most senior person and say, hey, this is not a secure environment, you need to move out of here because we're doing something in this space, right? To have the ability, the belief in those value systems to speak up when they need to speak up. So this is one example of solidifying these values in an organization structure. When you have this value solidified and lived in the company, people will go above and beyond to deliver on that value. And they would forego things like, and this is what I've seen as examples, when you're able to deliver on people's higher purpose and the way they feel in the organization, they don't mind being in situations, so they don't mind giving up some of the things that are on the lower levels of the hierarchy of needs. So things like today's hierarchy of needs would include things like your workspace, or even Wi-Fi connectivity, or even the most latest technology elements, right? And we saw this during the pandemic. A lot of these elements were stripped away. We had to go into lockdown. We had to go into very uncomfortable, uncertain situations. But companies that had these strong values, that lived those values, were able to still continue engaging and motivating employees. And we had people going above and beyond the pandemic situation to deliver what organizations need. That's where we want to get to with organization transformation. I don't know, did that make sense? It was quite a long description.
No, absolutely. And I think one of the things that you talk about in the book is that, yeah, the digital piece can give you massive acceleration and growth and all that sort of stuff. But if you haven't got the culture piece right, and I won't get into the companies, but you talk about some companies where they got all this growth, but the culture was wrong, where others, they got all this growth, but the culture was embedded from the outset. So I think what you're saying is, look, if you get that piece right and you then have the enabling technologies to accelerate your business model, great. But if you don't get it right, you actually are storing up a problem that will come back at you.
You will be in a situation where every step of the way you will be questioned. You will have people hesitating, having fears, not being inspired by the journey. And this is, roadblocks every step of your digital transformation process. And one of the most important elements to remember as well, when you've got the culture right, you've got the values right, and you've got the purpose right in your organization, that translates to your customers as well. People buy from companies that they believe in, and they engage with companies, and they connect with companies that have the same value system. So having this right not only creates an environment internally for digital transformation, but it creates those financial outcomes that you're looking for externally as well.
And I want to try and argue the other way, Tony, because I think, yeah, fair enough. Look, we're in an age now where everything is about culture, creating better cultures, and this idea maybe there's we change people to suit culture. And I'd probably point out the likes of Dave Snowden, who says that actually, is it right to be trying to change people at all, to force them to show up at work to be something other than they're not, for the sake of aligning with some sort of culture. And I suppose tied in with that is I think we do maybe need to also talk about technology. Technology changes the way we behave. It actually encourages new behaviors, new ways of believing, new ways of being. It encourages culture change, So if we don't also look at technology, I think we could be missing out on actually avenues towards, a future. So I'm just arguing that there's also the technology side of it.
No, I agree.
No, go on, Tony, go on.
I was going to say, no, I agree. And I think in the book, Kamales, you talk about the convergence of human and tech. And I was interested in the support, enhance, convey, and transcend, but I was particularly interested in the transcend. But you do allude to this, that actually it's not just about just the people side, it is about getting the people and technology side right.
Exactly. And I think one of the things that we can see in daily examples as well, what Paddy was saying earlier about getting the technology right and the people and values element. The way for me, or the most common example that we see today, is with social media, right? When you don't have the foundation values behind the organization, you can very quickly get into a situation where you have toxic negativity that's building up. You have mindsets being shifted and changes in human behavior being triggered by the content that's being shared on this and being shared to the masses, right? So you have mass shifts in thinking. And this is the power of technology that we see today. It's triggering a change in human behavior. And this is why having that foundation values is so important, and having the right values is important, because we can also trigger positive change and positive outcomes. And this is something, I call myself a technology optimist, because I really believe that there's so much positive that can come out of tech. And when we look at, going into a transcend environment with technology, the technology being part of who we are, this is not something we can debate about anymore, I believe. If we just look at the younger generation that's growing up with tech today, technology is like, if I look at how quickly my child adopts technology and how quickly she can get into a new game or get into a new piece of equipment, it's part of who they are today. Just like we grew up with, in the 80s and 90s, what we grew up with was so different. They grow up with this tech, and when there isn't Wi-Fi, they can't compute anymore. It's like, a place doesn't have Wi-Fi? How does that even work? So I think this is the convergence of people and technology has already happened. The next stage is how much how we're going to transcend that, and how technology is going to emulate and simulate human intelligence. But the one thing that it will never be able to simulate, I believe, is the human values and the core of who we are as humans.
So when you talk to leaders and you say, look, here's the world, do they say, oh, great, got that, I'm really confident about this? Or do they say, oh, we have a problem?
So I choose one of two ways when I talk to leadership teams. And a lot of that does come with engagement and understanding people and connecting with people and seeing what motivates them. Two things tend to motivate. One is to create fear of something that's going to be out of their control. Technology is going to disrupt. You're not going to have business anymore. You're going to decline, and so on. That works sometimes, and that works for a limited time, right? Creating the fear works for a limited time. The approach that I prefer and works for more sustainable results is to inspire people. And when I talk to leadership teams, I like to paint a picture of what the transformation outcome could look like for them. Imagine if you are so recently, as you know, I was in Oman, and we were presenting a workshop for a leadership team there. And one of the things that I was able to do was paint a picture for them. Imagine that you are in a open space in Oman, and you have a farm in a box solution where you can create a community of people, and you can bring in a container box that is fully equipped to create a farm environment, and you can grow your own produce next to this little village, fresh food out of the box, no logistics, no transportation required, no pollution of air, fully climate integrated. This could be a solution, and it exists today. All you need to do is engage with this company, and you can create this environment and produce sustainable results. And so they are in part of their business is in catering, so they can literally grow fresh produce next to their restaurants. And so when you paint these inspiring pictures and you show them the positive outcome of technology, or things like vertical farming or robotics farming, or even robotics cooking, where you could take a lot of the redundant work that the catering company does and automate it with up to 97% accuracy, error-free accuracy. And focus the people's efforts on engaging with other people on more complex tasks, on creating menus and creating sustainable outcomes with their customers. This paints such an inspiring picture that people are automatically motivated. They want to know, okay, how do we do that? How do we get there from where we are today? There's a big gap. So then you can start painting this picture of what this journey looks like from where you are today to that picture that you've just painted. And I think this is, for me, what I find most exciting about digital transformation as work.
And I see here there's questions about the leadership side as well. And I suppose maybe trying to bring a few questions together. I think one of the ideas is leaders don't stick around long enough. They're probably not brave enough, so that even though there are these visions and inspiring visions, are they going to bet on them? Are they going to bet their future on them? In a lot of cases, probably no, which is unfortunate. And also this concept of vulnerability, Kamales, that I know that's very important to you as well. So we've this idea that we need braver leaders that don't know the answer, but they have to be vulnerable and allow themselves explore for those answers. Any views on that?
Definitely some views on that. I think one of the things that I wanted to share with the audience today is the transformation that needs to happen for leadership teams as well. And part of this transformation, the reason I talk so passionately about it is because I believe I've gone through this transformation myself. The person I was 10 years ago, for example, and the person that I am today, I've been through a transformation where I had to reassess a lot of my own values and beliefs and really understand, in order to make transformation successful for a company, I need to be a different kind of leader. I need to be someone that is vulnerable. I need to be someone that learns from failure and learns from risk. I need to be someone that accepts that, you know, some of these things that traditionally within a business environment would have been seen as weakness is not actually weakness. It takes a lot more strength to be vulnerable, to be empathetical, to understand other people, and maybe sometimes to even step back and admit, okay, we've made a mistake, we need to take a different approach, to lead other people. And there are, in this space of digital, there are super intelligent people all around me. And to be able to lead teams of these extremely intelligent technical people, to really understand what motivates them and to accept that, you know, I don't have to be the toughest or the most accomplished in the room, but I need to be able to engage with people who are, and to allow them to lead in areas that they are more well-versed in. I think these are all transformations that had to happen. And at that point, I realized that this is what I want to look for in leadership teams when they drive transformation, this ability to be vulnerable and to accept there's a different way of thinking that's needed in the business corporate world around leadership. And this is something that when we have questions from people around leaders don't stand by this, or they don't have the guts to do something, or they leave too quickly, I think those individuals are not, for me, considered leaders. Leaders are the ones that commit, and that they're the ones that say, I'm taking people on this journey, I'm going to handhold and I'm going to drive. I have to be also constantly open to feedback, right? And this means sometimes the feedback is good, sometimes the feedback is not so good, but that's okay. It's a journey for all of us, and it's a learning for all of us. And I don't think everyone's comfortable with that, particularly if we look at, you know, leadership team members that we may know or that we've observed globally. I think this is such an important shift that needs to happen in the business world.
Yeah, and in the book, you talk about the leadership traits. I particularly love the one abundance thinking, but abundance and power, empathy, you know, close to the customer, adaptability, encouraging conviction. But I think one of the things you also bring out, Kamales, is, you know, this ecosystem isn't just out there. The ecosystem is in here as well. So it's in your organization. And I think what you're really saying is, well, I don't have to have all the answers as a leader, but I have this ecosystem around me that has loads of answers and loads of ideas. And if I could just harness that.
One of the things that I think is really important, right, as a mindset, is to be able to connect the dots. There is no shame in looking around in our network and finding people who might have expertise in certain things, to be able to connect the dots and pull those different support structures. So one thing that I really described within the book is creating this ecosystem. The future of organizations really depends on being able to create a strong ecosystem, that connection between the different players. Within the organization, you have the leadership and ownership of the company, as well as the employees of the organization. And external to the company, you have not only your customers, but you also have your partners and collaborators. You know, it could be a learning institution. It could be, for example, the digital transformation labs that you guys have. So really having this sort of partner collaborator engagement, but also then providers or service providers offering you services that you don't necessarily have within your organization, capabilities or skills you might not have in the company. Connecting the dots with all of these different players And even looking to your peer structures, your competitive landscape, what can we learn from each other? How can we collaborate and build ecosystems that are going to be mutually beneficial for us? This is where you really find the value of digital transformation. It's all about technology solutions. It's all about solutions that are creating mutual benefit rather than individual companies looking to create sustainable outcomes for themselves. This is what I try to convey in the book at the end.
And again, just looking at some of the questions here, Kamales, I suppose two different sort of strands left. One, I suppose, is this idea that the market really nearly determines the behavior of our leaders, and whether that's shareholders or that's customers, very often we respond to what the market is looking for. And the second point then is all digital transformation really cultural transformation?
So the first part, I think, yes, the market does to a certain extent drive the behavior, but this is why the value and the belief system in the organization has to be strong enough. And most of the examples that I present, the positive examples of strong organizations in the book, these examples demonstrate that organizations like this, with those strong foundation, purpose-driven organizations, will be able to outlast those shifts in market beliefs. So whether your share prices are dropping or if you're in a tough economic situation, at the end of the day, these strong values will survive that. For the second part, I think digital transformation for me is an end-to-end change of an organization. It does involve looking at every aspect of how you currently do business in that company, all the different touch points and your operating model, your cost structures, the whole environment, and thinking about how you could shift this into this new digital space or this new digital business landscape. What can you build that's going to survive the next 5 to 10 years? And so cultural transformation is an essential part of that, but it's not the only part of that. It does come, and this is something that I do present in the book, the how-to structure or the end-to-end methodology on how to do this. And you will see in that methodology, there's an element or a touch point to various different key things, culture being one of that.
Yeah. And I suppose just before I hand over to Tony as well, one really interesting aspect, I wonder, is there a difference between how we would have this conversation if we were in the US versus Europe versus even the likes of Malaysia? You mentioned that. Have we really emphasized a lot about values culture, because that's maybe a European or a certain way of looking at it, whereas that would figure far less if we were having this conversation maybe in the US with US-based organizations?
I think the biggest difference that I've seen for the different regions, because I have worked with companies across US, Europe, Asia, Middle East, as well as, basically even in the African region. I think one of the key things that stood out for me is not so much about, obviously there's a certain deviation when it comes to location culture, so cultures from different parts of the world. There's a certain deviation in the organization. That key difference for me is in the way the message is conveyed. Understanding what motivates people and how you convey the message to them about what needs to change in the organization. The thing that's more different when it comes to organizations, it's about the values and beliefs in the company and the digital maturity level in the company. So looking at organizations, it doesn't matter whether you're in the US or in Asia, how far along that digital journey, that disruptive journey, the type of industry that you're in, how far along have you come? And how far do you need to go from that point? So it's more about understanding the current situation of that organization rather than any specific culture being more advanced than the other. So I've spoken to companies in Asia, for example, that have applied some of the latest technologies, robotics and so on, where culture transformation is not something that they've addressed at all. And I've spoken to companies in Africa where they're still very much into mobile technology, for example, but they're so embedded into how we take people on a journey and how we engage with people as we try to transform for the next stage of digital. So I think it really depends on which industry you're in, the kind of organization it is, and the digital maturity of that organization.
Super. I'm glad you brought those up, because I was going to mention the building blocks in digital maturity, and you have dealt with digital maturity very well in the book, because I think that is so important in terms of understanding where you're at on the journey. Kamales, I'm just conscious we've about 3-4 minutes. Is there any big parting message you want to give our audience in terms of what was the key message you would like people to walk away with?
I think the key message that I did try to convey in the book, today we talked a lot about culture change as an element. That's just one aspect of digital transformation. I think looking at the entire picture of digital transformation, there are so many different elements that play a role. Every one of those elements have a human element to it, or a human touch point to it. Whether you're looking at technology adoption, the types of solutions you want to put out in the market, the way you run your organizations, the way you interact with customers, all of these elements have something human related to it. And so I think the key message that I wanted to convey is there's a structured approach behind it. There is a methodology that I've applied that's been successful over the past 2 decades. But at the end of the day, all of these technologies, all of these strategies depend on the people behind it, basically, and the people using it. And this is one of the key things I wanted to share.
Great, super. Paddy, any final words?
No, and I think it would be wrong not to mention there's an incredible strategy framework within the book, and I just want to call out even the elements of it which I think are fascinating and actually tie in with some of the other questions we have here about the role of the likes of design thinking, etc. But the 4 elements I think are situational analysis, disruptive visioning, strategic road mapping, building and implementing. So, and I think that's a really powerful framework. So we only had an hour today. We were never going to do justice to the whole book. But Kamales, I know I've already had people asking, when can they get the book? Where can they get the book?
They can get it on Amazon in 2 days.
2 days' time. Wow.
Well, look, I highly recommend the book. I have read it cover to cover. It's a great read. And Kamales, absolute pleasure to have you here today. And we wish you every success with the book. So we want to thank you for being here today. We want to thank our audience. And it's great to see so many questions coming through, and great questions too. And I want to thank our steering committee, and also to thank Cork University Business School for its ongoing support. So Kamales, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tony. And thank you, Paddy. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here.